Okay. Um, let's do this. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. All right. The episode, this episode is an important one. And it's one where I find out of everything I have spoken about, I have personally, I've had certain personal experiences. Of course, a lot of them, a lot of what I say is out of my personal experiences, but the requests of ultimate clarity from nature is I experienced it as a moment. There was a moment where I realized I have no clue what is looking throughout my eyes, and every thought and every idea I have on it is observable. And so I kind of got uh, this kind of realization that my whole life has been me constantly projecting one carrot connected to a rope on a stick connected to my back after the next. I was living, believe it or not, a mule's life. Where I was searching for paradise through language. That means I realized a lot of my motivations to exist were preferences to be acknowledged through a certain decency of the language of my own mind. You see, human beings are very interesting creatures. If you're alone on an island, your mind has no choice but to become the source of your moment, to become the life of your own moment. But when we are in society and in civilization, when there's others, the person realizes that there's other moments that are alive, moments where there's activity occurring, that there's many unknown potentials, that even if you saw someone on the street, you can get a sense of where they're going, but you will never know how they are walking to their destination. So in 2014, 15, I did not feel I had everything. I did not feel any sort, like there wasn't per se an archetype. I was more fascinated in how the archetypes were there, how the egoic construct of my personality was in motion, you know? I think every person, every living being at some point in their life wonders what is this all about? Is it comprehensible? Are there more dimensions at work than sensory perception grants? I think many people who become curious about their inner realms do develop relationships at first, but it is the task of the unknown to make the known realize it is not the only thing it. And the task of the unknown towards the unknown, that means if there are other dimensions, let us say, for that it's kind of like opposites attract, but opposites are attracting from different dimensional states. What that means is it's as if there are moments where I feel as if I am not a concept, I am not an object or a subject or any sort of identification. Sometimes I have an experience where I am just a movement. It's literally like wind with eyes. Sometimes I feel like I'm a wind with is made in the image. Guys, anytime this says disconnected, I'll stop talking. But it's reconnected now. It's like realizing like your understanding of the world is arising from how you are standing under a self, under a sense of self. what I'm trying to say is that if you have an ability to look at ink on a paper and that animates into language and into subjective phenomena, there's also an ability for subjective phenomena to retranslate objectivity. So what that means is let's say for example I'm walking and I had an experience. I'll tell you. It's like years ago. I found myself walking in a park, which I later on realized it was a cemetery. And so while I was walking there, I remember seeing the squirrel, and it was a very Tibetan Buddhist phase of my life, And so I remember just walking very peacefully in nature alone, you know. And there was a squirrel. There was a squirrel that just suddenly for a second was staring at me. It's like a squirrel on the ground, like it was doing something. Suddenly it's alert something in its environment. And I remember I was in my own kind of elegance of inner realms, and I look at the squirrel and I just point my fingers up to the sky, and I suddenly notice the squirrel move. Now I could have associated the movement of the squirrel to me. Oh man, it moved because of me. Things are happening because of me. But you can also see it that it was just nature's coincidence, that there are many worlds accessing the same world only to discover they are all beyond the worlds they consider. Through the vocalization of my logos in the inner realms, of not my logos, of the logos in the inner realms, that means human beings don't have an objective relationship with life. They have a subjective relationship with life, but when they become observant of the subjective self, they can then, the mind has the capacity to animate. So you can, as much as you think of it this way, you can build in the objective component of your moment, and you can also build subjectively. And so it was the relationship of other worlds, spirituality, metaphysics. A lot of these has to do with the relationship of the personal, you can say, the inner life with the outer life. Okay, the inner life is personal. It is really administered by your truths of the world, you know. The outer life is not administered. It's by impersonal truths. That means we need to be aware of truths or things occurring that move beyond personhood. Okay, so I remember having this kind of moment where the intuitive communication of my own subjective realms, realms of abstraction, cellular planes of abstraction, it was as if the mind, think of it this way: imagine you see something, you don't understand it, then many weeks go by, and suddenly you realize exactly how that thing was, you know. Many years go by, suddenly you realize why certain behaviors were active in certain moments of your memory. The fascinating thing is as the comprehension and understanding of the human being increases, their access to how their memories have meaning also changes. That means when you learn something, and if that thing was happening when in your childhood and you didn't know it, suddenly even though you remember the memory, you will remember it. So I'll give an example. So I'm bilingual, and at the age of 7, I'll tell you this funny, 6, 7, like I was very young. My parents brought me to Vancouver, and I remember attending grade 1. And for the first time, like the only words I knew were yes, no, and my name, right? So I remember I'm there, and the teacher, I thing that the teacher gets angry, like it was this messed up kind of, I don't know, and she had anger issues. Like now thinking, she was probably the worst teacher to have around kids. But like this teacher gets super angry, and I don't know. At the time, I have no idea what this lady's saying. It's just this like random lady shouting at me in like the first day you've gone to. And so I remember she comes and says something, like I know that she's asking me a question. At least I don't understand the question, but she's shouting something, and I say yes. And then she says something else, and then I say no. And then she says something else, I say yes. And it's like I only knew these two words, and I was just like and so guess what? At the time, the memory was accessible. I lived through that moment. I had access to my ears heard the sounds of her voice, but I could not comprehend the English language. Years later, when I comprehended the English language, I returned to that memory, and everything she said was comprehensible. That's what I mean. Our present is changing our past, so the past is gone for good. The past is past in such a way that if we had time travel, it still would not be time travel. It would be a sort of recreational time, recreated time, not recreational, recreate. So 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 that was like a moment where you see, it's like the memory wasn't, the experience was limited in access of comprehension, but as in later years of my life I learned the English language, suddenly those memories, every English word I had heard suddenly became accessible, you know. So many memories suddenly gained a new color as I learned a new language, and by learning that new language, there was a greater comprehension. You know, it's like in your life, every person notices gravity, but they don't have the concept for it as a young child, you know? And so it's as if, imagine suddenly being like realizing the concept of gravitation, and at the same at that moment being like, oh shit, look at all the things that fell in my experience, you know. So it definitely recolors how the past was animated, at least. So I have this kind of hypothesis that any person who remembers their past is actually shifting it. It's a co-creation with the present moment and the memory. So what that means is the emotions of now are trying to remember another moment where the mind was in another state. So it's like a mind in a different state now is trying to remember a certain way it was in a state, and it sees it is limited to the bias of how it is now. It was honestly like the teacher in that experience laughs. I later on, like the teacher, as I remember what she was saying, "Do you want to go to the principal's office?" Right? I wasn't listening, so she was saying, "Do you want to go to the principal's office?" And because I only knew the words yes and no, I was like, "Yes." And then she was like, "Do you want to go to the principal's office?" And then I was like, "No." And then she realized I just know yes and no, and I'm just saying them one after another. Oh man. Requests of ultimate clarity from nature. What does that mean? That means there will come a moment in your life where the simple will not want the complex, and the complex will not want the simple. There will be a sort of presence, and a presence where the unknown reintroduces itself to the eyes that have been shaped for the first time. What that means is man thinks of himself as a small being, but it's actually the other way around. Behind your eyes, you are the macrocosm. In front of your eyes, you're the microcosm. In front of your eyes, there's a conditional reality. You have to meet these conditions. You have to survive. You have to live on. But behind your eyes, the circumstances are different. They're evocational, which renders them kind of experientially unconditional. So what that means is, regardless of what condition, you can remember any memory. You know, you if when somebody tells you, "Hey man, what was that story you said yesterday?" So it's as if like out of, regardless of where you are, what state of mind, there is access to to the animation of that reality. So this relationship between the conditional and the unconditional is life, and the sooner you can discriminate between the two, there comes a sort of pleasantness, because even though we're creatures of free will, our free will seems as an illusion because we are in a system. You see, the only way we may feel we have free will is if we are as abstract as the concept of God. We are everything and nothing at the same time. When for example, it said God is everything, nothing is included as part of everything, you know. So what that means is human beings, or let me say life forms of our species, they have a relationship with the life part which is unknown and should be kept unknown. And there's a relationship with the form part which should be known. That means you, as a creature of your sensory perceptions, require to process the way things are in form. Oftentimes it's like entering a room and wondering why the room looks that way. It's like, oh, your eyes have opened in a world, wonder why the world looks this way. And as you wonder about it, you begin to see the various potentials, the various way it animates. And eventually I think the conclusion will be that it is not just an inner journey, and it's not just an external journey, it's a navigation, it's a flight. We have to pilot between states of mind that feel they're transparent in this cosmic vastness, and their states of mind which are identifying with certain factors, you know. That moment when the person is hungry, guess what? He's identifying, he's a materialist. Anytime I'm hungry, I'm a materialist. But when the basic hungers of the biological program is kind of satisfied, when the hungers of the cultural program are satisfied, when the hungers of the various programs, the language program, what I mean by that is like when your mind becomes content, when your mind looks at all the language it has walked past by like a museum and or like an art gallery and realizes where it stands. And so novelty is close friends with the unknown and the empty, because from emptiness arises new form. And the only reason we have a concept of novelty is because we weren't here from the beginning. You know, that means eyes. Somebody says it's like a person lives is alive in two worlds. There's a world that starts from the moment you were born to the moment you transition out of this plane of existence, and then there is a world that was here before you, and there is a world that will be here after you. You know, and so the as the suggestion, the world that was here before you and it's going to be here after you, is an implication that there is certain things that it doesn't matter how much you have love and passion. It's like, can the hands hold that weight? Can the hands carry that weight? And so it's kind of an implication that our intelligence is oscillating between self-administration and administration from others or the world. It's like people are not in a relationship just with themselves to live a self-gratifying life only. You are in your psychology, your mind is in a symbiosis with an unknown terrain, and that unknown terrain is the world, and it deserves attendance. That means it's like, I don't care if any student misses any class, but do not miss attending a civilization that after 4 billion years it has now kind of come to a stasis. It's like the stasis of our evolution is because our biology started evolving less, but our inner realm started to evolve a lot. So what that means is, if we continue literally, if as if I no, like nobody changes the way civilization is headed, it's we're going to soon identify as minds. You can even see it, guys. You can see it. It's like we started from the archetypal positions of man, like for example the biology. You know, we were defined by our objective being. But nowadays, you see that, especially in modern civilizations, there's a strange freedom that does not want to let the past intervene in the introduction of the new. So strangely, regardless of our beliefs, there's 8 billion of us, and this world is for here for all of us. For why else would we be in it? And it is true that most people live their lives wondering what is the role of their atomic manifestation in the void of empty space. And I realized that it's just like how in businesses you administer. Sorry, guys. I think my voice was too low. So everything I said. Oh my God. So guys, was it clear? If anyone's listening, please let me know if you can hear, if you heard what I said before this. Why is this okay, whatever. You know, it is I think in the karma of many scholars to search for a sort of conscious perfection to the organization of how they have symbolized the world to mean something. But I think here's the thing, that in the wars of the intellect, love will be remembered. And that's the strange thing. Many times I've kind of attempted for a sort of ultimate effort. That means you got to realize one thing in this life. What is your free will? It's an energetic expression. What is energetic expression? It is effort. What is effort ultimately? It's like importance of where your attention is to you as a being. So you will put effort in what is important for you, and what is important for you is not just what is real. It is what is real to you and your world. It's kind of like the scholar going to the dervish back in the day and being like, "Hey man, what is this? How do I intellectually figure this out?" And the dervish was like, "If you just want to intellectually find the pearl, the truth, the enlightened truth, it's as if whipping a dead donkey to run faster. You have to be conscious of how your mind is dissecting reality's implications." And so what that means is most people tend to walk in life feeling like they know what's going on, they know what's going on. But it's as if suddenly realizing everything you knew has an unknown element to it. And when you really are willing, I think if you are sincere enough to acknowledge the unknown, um, the falsehood of the egoic structures break down. That means you, rather than being a sort of fixed character in a story, you end up being an attention to how the world is animating characteristics. And the only way you can, it's kind of strange, but like, you know how they say it's like you got to become uh, the world for the new self first. It's like we think if there is any sort of travel, whether it's through time travel or it's multidimensional travel, travel through various dimensions, or it is internal kind of inner flights traveling through the inner realm, whatever kind of thing it is that if it is a change of world, it will be accompanied by a change of self. If it's a change of self, it will be accompanied by a change of world. So what does that mean? That means if there are greater dimensions, our mind has to be them first before we can animate. We have to be the world where the doer emerges from, right? So it's as if kind of the recognition that if humanity was seen to have 8 billion boxes on its head, imagine you had like a box on your head, and inside the box, it's like nothing. Sometimes I feel we as beings, our minds are boxed up. That's why there's the pitch black abyss behind your eyes. It's as if your head is in a box, you see nothing, you know? I mean, this when I say this pitch black abyss, I mean everybody confronts this. I mean it's natural. Just close your eyes. What is that? That blackness behind your eyes are covered. The absence of the light that meaning is identified with means that any time you close your eyes or that moment you go to sleep, regardless of your ideology, it's like before your body, it's like you're lying down on your bed, your body calms down, your body's kind of going to sleep, but your mind hasn't gone to sleep yet. And so in that moment, it's as if you are a purely subjective creature. The thing about concentration is that you can have enough attention in your subjective realms that you animate in them. So it's as if like if the body can't move, the mind still can. If the mind can't move, the body still can. you know it's like realizing it's a relationship between dimensions, yet there is a way to interpret all of it as just the presence of moment. It's like, what are you? They come and say it's like the greatest philosopher came and said, what am I? And some other philosopher was like, you're energy, bro. And the guy's like, energy, that's it? It's like, yeah, you're just energy. And the guy's like, but what about the purpose of man? What about the purpose of life? He's like, yeah, but you're still energy. So that's the thing. That's the thing. You must have an ability as a pilot of your consciousness to confront the dimension of zero, empty. It's like, don't fear anything that you can observe. Fear what you cannot observe. you know that's why there's many, for example, in all religious traditions, if you go to their greatest scholars and you're like, what is wisdom, man? What is wisdom in this monotheistic religion? you know and so the guy would be like, what do you think? Fear of God. And it's true. It's very true. Fear of God brings forth the same sort of sensitivity to being afraid of a science experiment going wrong. It's a fear of the world's consequence. And so some people may say, it's like, wait, what kind of wisdom is it where it's inspired out of fear? I'll tell you, fear is a blessing. And usually any moment in your life you experience fear, take like maybe 3 seconds or max 10 seconds. Just close your eyes and just acknowledge anytime there's fear, a new self has to act. Anytime there's fear, a new self has to act. That means you can be endlessly afraid. You can be afraid of anything. Do you know how advanced the mind is? Do you know how much the mind can endlessly build itself, but it can endlessly destroy itself? Do you know how many human beings are geniuses in this world, but their minds are trapped in a sort of archetypal position where they're subconsciously resisting what is? So ultimately, what does that mean? That means we're in a tension, flying between everything and nothing. And what we realize is that as temporary journeyers, imagine you're a tourist in a country. What is important for you? Of course, you're not a member of that country, so you may not have the same affinity as it, even though that's wrong, even though we're all citizens of the cosmopolites, as Diogenes says. As a tourist, you are a guest in a new place. And if people feel like they're a guest, like imagine you were invited to the greatest party of them all, and that party is life. You're invited. You're a conscious moment in the history of our existence. We are moving into an era of collective archetypes, collective identities. We are realizing that experience is the teacher of our intellect. We are realizing that fear was only wisdom because when there came the edge of the world, there was also the sight beyond the edge. And you must confront. One thing in this life that you should know is that you are performing every day of your life in front of yourself. You are a performance of manifestation in your awareness. Honestly, I think saints, this is like pretty kind of odd tangent, but but I think saints are gonna freak out when they look at the spelling of the word saint. Man is defined by action. He is also defined by his inaction. And evolution means definitions will move even beyond what is accessible now. That is kind of like my, regardless of whether I feel my voice will be heard or not. There is something that has given me in my subconscious a sort of contentment with the future. Because when you see nature, it's like, sure, you can say human beings are like ants on a hill that have claimed the world as their own kingdom of intellect, but you can know that if there is something intelligent, like, for example, sure, you don't have to see a concept of God behind it, but it's like this world has intelligence. There is patterns of intelligence. Most of this intelligence is solar powered. One thing that we have in common with all the species in the world, imagine if all the animals and insects and uh, birds and everything, every creature on this planet, if they could speak, what you would have in common, it's like, hey, look at the light that we're all standing in. The sun is our unification of vision. The sun is our secret language. It is the language of light. I remember in my early talk saying a great technology will be born in the future from light and sound. That means when we reach the evolution of our comprehension of light, when we reach the evolution of our comprehension of sound, we realize our greatest technology, which is the mind. You are right now sound and light performing in emptiness. Okay. Fear is, Aziz, as you say in the chat section, fear is wisdom question mark. Yeah, in the religious sense, fear of the lack of awareness of the laws of the cosmos or the will of the cosmos. You got to realize people who entertain a religious context, they're not living in a lifeless world. They're living in a world where they're ascribing the intelligence of all existence to one common, unfathomable source, which they feel is watching them. So what that means is man's personality. It's like kind of God is strangely an attempt to give a personality to a world. Now that personality, of course, either we are made in the image of the unknown, or the unknown is made in the image of our knowledge. Fear is wisdom because it is the only thing that makes you instantaneously wonder about a different self or a different parallel to the moment. You know, it's I feel, of course, we have a poet, I believe his name was Hafez. He says, I believe Hafez said, Hafez of Shirazi, Man was a Sufi dervish mystic poet, Persian mystic poet from 700 years ago or something. He said, "Fear is the cheapest room in the house. I would like to see you living in better conditions." So what does that mean? That means fear is a moment where the consciousness is sincerely confronting limitation. And what do you do with limitation? This is the option. You let the world happen, you do nothing. You do something and you happen to the world. And karma is like a car where you feel it's like autonomous driving, but at some point, like you reach a point where the car's autonomous driving stops and it's manual, you know? And that manual point is really the confrontation of the fear, where you realize you can either your self moves the world or the world moves yourself. The less you do, the more you will experience the world pushing you. The more you do, the more you feel you are pushing the world. And so there comes this conflict, and I find a lot of party animals in this world experience moments where they have exerted a sort of effort of expression in the moment only to contemplate its significance later. Fear is wisdom, you know. If you are not afraid of fire, you might confusingly kind of put your hand in there in it too long. You know, so there are certain things that it's like everything that's happening to the being is something to at least observe, you know. When I say the concept, let's say learning is when your observance is shifting, as if behind your eyes the narrative of the world is a sculpture. And when you learn something, it's as if you compared your sculpture to some other sculpture, another worldview, and then it becomes resculpted. And so when we have this sense that we are sculpting our own experiences, then our involvement and engagement with life becomes more of a sincere one. If you go to the artist and say, "What do you live for?" He'll be like, "I live for the new." You know, you go and to the, for example, scientist, and you say, "What do you live for?" And he's like, "I live for the past, our advances, how we have advanced so far from where we were to where we are going," and da 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 da. On some level, you must honor every living being because every living being is simultaneously being a part of your moment, and your moment is being your mind simultaneously. So, any person you have been rude to, nice to in this world, you have simultaneously been nice to how your mind is extracting vision as that moment. So, this is why this is the moment, say, the seeker of the unknown's truth. No longer climbs the mountain of linear time. On some level, you have to wonder, as if nobody knows anything, for you to discover the nature of your personal truths. Personal truths could be even truths, things that are true for you, but you have not brought them forth into the realm of conscious reasoning. So you see, anything right now as I'm speaking to you, when I say the word, it is definitely in a sort of conscious observance, you know, that is reasoning. And then before I say it, it is subjective. This is why, for me, speech was intimidating when I was younger until I understood what it is. And I understood that there is a life behind our eyes that deserves to be shared with the life in front of it. And so you can say any person who looks in the mirror and does not see a named idea as themselves, you are pretty much as enlightened as the light in your eyes. What that means is you are aware of awareness before the self, rather than self dictating how you are aware. So what that means is behind your eyes, um, uh, behind your minds, you are the world. In the subtitle, I've written "Live for the Living." The idea there is that when you live sometimes for your inner realm, it is something that is not animate. You can say it is temporarily animate in the gaze of the body. When you live for life, it means you're living to for your greatest comprehension of what you feel is decent enough to continue. And it's like man has to be responsible for his inner life as much as his outer life. But if he thinks his inner life is his outer life, then you become a language worshiper. You become an ideal worshiper. So that means I kind of consider it that there's, for example, the religious context, the story of Abraham. And so it's as if there was this house filled with idols, and Abraham comes in this house and is like, what is this? And people are like, these are our gods, man. Get away from our God, bro. And what happens is that all these idol worshippers leave, and Abraham breaks all these statues and puts the hammer beside the one of the statues he doesn't break. They all come in and they're like, Abraham, did you do this? And Abraham's in the room and he's like, no, this God did it. And they're like, this God can't do it. It doesn't have hands. It's just a head. And so and so then Abraham says, how's this God? If it can break. And so what that means is man was his our attention was purely on an objective phenomena, and we were accepting that as ultimate. But then after the idols of our worship were slapped out of our hand, if you just look at history, what did people worship after? Language, the subjective. It's as if an objective phenomena was no longer truth, and then suddenly subjective phenomena became truth. So people started worshiping language. Language began becoming like the matrix code on the screen for people's minds. So this is why I'm very boldly saying we're not creatures of thought, we're not creatures of language, we're creatures of attention. We are the presence of an attributeless attention prior, prior to any sort of movement or noise that identifies and simulates linguistic simulation. I call it the language simulation simply because, guys, without sound and movement, there is no story. To start from a new angle, it's like we are a phenomena, and we are aware of this phenomena, and in its movement, in its noise, that means when sound and movement arise, that which has objectively identified with a static, inanimate silence and stillness becomes set into motion. So one can say the conscious, when we wake up in the morning, it's as if like you're pushing a billiard ball down a table. It has your day is attaining a sort of momentum to how you awakened to the texture and the design of phenomenology. And so most people, when they're with others, they find themselves having a sort of requirement to step outside of their personal truths to find a space. So this is the thing where usually when you see people who don't give themselves freedom and people who do give themselves freedom, the distinction comes in how they are choosing to preserve. Because ultimately, it's like things begin, things are maintained, and then things end. And when we realize in how many subtler dimensions this is occurring, how in one moment you may something new may be starting, but something also may be leaving. It's like you can say when something is added to the person, that's a new experience. When something leaves a person is a new experience. If you realize that the concept of wealth, the concept of luxury, the concept of abundance, they have to do with how the inner life is approaching the outer life. And suddenly your inner life has a value for you. It fascinates you how you as a creature on this planet have had a mind that has opened up like this. In all the years you have ran laps around the sun, it becomes a situation where it's unique. It's like waking up and realizing you are a member of a civilization and a sort of a point of your history. It's like in schools, yes, I understand, teach about the past, of the greatness of the past, and they do. But the thing is that when we feel we are in the shadows of the greatness of the past, we don't attempt greatness of the modernity. So the modern constantly becomes less, because we have become, it's like too shy for our own greatness. Guys, this is hilarious, but I'm gonna go into a quote tunnel of I'm pretty much gonna search enlightenment quotes on Google and read. I want to see like what the world's saying. Um, Enlightenment sayings and enlightenment quotes. All right. All right, guys. So, by the way, a quote tunnel is a sort of thing I bring in these episodes where I pretty much dive into the eyes of those who have lived before us or are living among us. Okay, this person named Marianne Williamson. She says enlightenment is the key to everything, and it is the key to intimacy because it is the goal of true authenticity. Okay, I like that. Nikos Kazantzakis. Kazantzakis. Anyways, this person, Nikos, says the real meaning of enlightenment is to gaze with undimmed eyes on all darkness. Wow. Idris Shah, a very important figure. He says enlightenment must come little by little, otherwise it would overwhelm. Elon Musk, an incredible person who I kind of feel it's an honor to be alive at the same time as him. He says, really, the only thing that makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. You know, that's true. Ernest Holmes. Borrowing knowledge of reality from all sources, taking the best from every study, science of mind brings together the highest enlightenment of the ages. Okay. Thich Nhat Hanh says enlightenment is always there. Small enlightenment will bring great enlightenment. If you breathe in and are aware that you are alive, that you can touch the miracle of being alive, then that is a kind of enlightenment. Bodhidharma, the fifth patriarch of Buddhism, I believe, in Japan, he says, not creating delusions is enlightenment. Lao Tzu, this Chinese philosopher, he says there are many paths to enlightenment. Be sure to take one with a heart. And William Blake, an incredible poet, he says enlightenment means taking full responsibility for your life. I feel he would have said it more poetic than that, but okay. Lama Surya Das says enlightenment is not about becoming divine. Instead, it's about becoming more fully human. It is the end of ignorance. Thich Nhat Hanh again says there is no enlightenment outside of daily life. Wayne Dyer says, if I could define enlightenment briefly, I would say it is the quiet acceptance of what is. Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it. The silence of the cosmos that moves the mind before the mind needs to hear words. Carl Jung, he says one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And by making the darkness conscious means that if you're in a dark room, find a light. Your free will is a light. Is like this air flame that has kind of sparked in this reality. Sometimes when I see how human beings organize themselves, it just shouts out otherworldly. Zen Master Dogen says, "Do not think you will necessarily be aware of your own enlightenment." M. Scott Peck says, "Nirvana or lasting enlightenment or true spiritual growth can be achieved only through persistent exercise of real love." Walter Isaacson says, "Just being the seeker, somebody who's open to spiritual enlightenment, is in itself the important thing, and it's the reward for being a seeker in this world." Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, it means do not banish your true self, regardless of how the world has treated you or you have treated the world. Um, DT Suzuki says enlightenment is like everyday consciousness but 2 inches above the ground. The moment of enlightenment is when a person's dreams of possibilities become images of probabilities. Vic Braden. That's a good one. Moment of enlightenment is when a person's dreams of possibilities become images of probabilities. Yeah. I mean, I feel this is more of an Eastern, a Western definition of enlightenment. Bodhidharma says only one person in a million becomes enlightened without a teacher's help. Oh, come on. But I understand what he's saying. He's speaking to the cultural program of his time. George Orwell says enlightened people seldom or never possess a sense of responsibility. Seldom or never possess a sense of responsibility. Wow. I don't know how he's using the word enlightened here. But I think he means by that he's referring it to a sort of narcissism, I think. Lao Tzu says again, he who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened. Andrew Cohen says everybody wants to get enlightened, but nobody wants to change. Kelsang Gyatso says enlightenment is the inner light of wisdom that is permanently free from all mistaken appearance and whose function is to bestow mental peace upon each and every living being every day. Lynn Johnston, only a couple of times have I ever been to church and felt enlightened. Thich Nhat Hanh says we need enlightenment, not just individually but collectively, to save the planet. We need to awaken ourselves. We need to practice mindfulness if we want to have a future, if we want to save ourselves and the planet. Yeah, if we ignore the world in front of us, the world behind our eyes would be purely meaningless. Charlotte Joko Beck says enlightenment is not something you achieve. It is the absence of some. You have been going forward after something. It changes dimensions and it's like observes its life then. Adyashanti says enlightenment means waking up to what you truly are and then being that. So, yeah, some people get enlightened by the mirror of the moment. Eckhart Tolle says spiritual realization is to see clearly that what I perceive, I experience, think, or feel is ultimately not who I am, that I cannot find myself in all those things that continually pass away. Yep. Stefan Bodian. He says, when you awaken, you realize that the separate person you took yourself to be is just a contract, a mental fabrication. And last but not least, Sampo Kasila. Spiritual awakening is about waking up from your ego. It is not about awakening the ego. So anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. The ultimate clarity from one nature one can truly, I find, comprehend, is to just be the decent, simple self, the decent, simple, honest self, and just live. Just abide. It's as if it's like some people, you can choose your thoughts to direct you, your let me say your subjective realm to navigate your life. You can decide the objective realm or the witness, which is beyond speed. That means in any kind of any person you go ask about success, for them it's a matter of speed towards attainment. And so when moment where you're not considering speed, what are you? You're automatically, it's like the doer and what is being is simultaneous. They're becoming less, the attention is being less locked down to one side of the spectrum. So the request of ultimate clarity from nature is to realize that your experience is mirroring your existence, your known existence to the unknown, to an unknown experiencer. That means right now, be happy because you know who you are, and also be happy because you don't. You have no clue who you will be. Will Durant says knowledge is the eye of desire and can become the pilot of the soul. And I feel really what truly pilots the soul is the unknown. And when we as a species realize that we can see it as an opponent, I mean, like, look at what many nations are doing. It's like fear games. Okay, and because of fear games, what does that really mean? That means man is not thinking, man is reacting. And to be able to really truly be able to be aware of how thought moves. Sometimes for me, when I read a sentence in a book, it's like I don't it's not about the author, it's not about anything. It's just how do the concepts become alive behind my eyes? How is the world alive? And that's when the smile of the free will is found. For the only way to live for life is to live for life. You gotta care for the living, you know? And sometimes when we selfishness arises where you justify the moment based on your inner realms more than just simply being in the outer realms. You justify the moment by the complexity of the inner realms rather than simply being in the outer realm. It's as if your complexity blindfolds you from the living component, that life must be cared for, you know. Because if life is not cared for, it's as if we don't even care for advancement. We don't care for our evolution, you know? Those people that use a bridge the wrong way, they don't care for their evolution because the social fabric, the civilization has failed them and they have failed themselves in their own. And so it's very crucial to realize that there are two kinds of death. There is an inner death, and there's an objective death, and there's a subjective death. I'm saying this playfully but incredibly seriously at the same time. So what I mean by that is, like, when your body is born as a child, there you are not a person yet. Your mind is at that point just absorbing the world and trying to be it, you know. Consciousness is like realizing the word being is a verb. So it's like, think of the psychology um, of the species. If we acknowledged that we are not static moments that can be compared to one another, we are the dynamism. We are like, I remember I was at Edwards Gardens years ago and I had an apple, you know. Oh, no, no, I remember, guys. I was in Edwards Garden. I was sitting on a bench and I was writing. And there was this guy who was like, there was some creature. I don't know what it was. It kind of looked like, it wasn't a beaver, but it looked like one, you know. And without the tail, I don't know what the name of the animal was. There was this guy throwing ripe apples. And he comes up to me and he gives me an apple to throw at the animal, right? And I was so busy writing that of course, I take the apple, I thank the guy, and as I'm writing and the guy's going, right? Uh, Suddenly I noticed, like, after I finished my writing, I noticed that the animal is not there. So what do? I have the apple in my hand and I throw the apple just in the river. I'm like, all right, let's see where the river is going to take the apple. And I throw the apple, and as I see the apple, for a moment, it was kind of strange because the river
was like dodging all the rocks. So when the apple was abiding by the rhythm of the river, like it was pulled by the rhythm of the river, it was automatically going by the water and dodging all the rocks, all the obstacles. So it kind of made me feel that the human intelligence is rhythmic, and we have to totally realize every branch of knowledge is going to have a new meaning in a new world. So anyways, guys, that's the ultimate clarity from nature is realizing what is in front of your eyes and what is behind your eyes are very simply the moment. From simplicity emerges complexity. Simplicity is the father of complexity. And when one realizes this, fear, to be honest, ultimately is being aware of the simple before the complex. So you can say, even though religion by many people is seen as a mass hallucination, but it is a very intellectual effort to, in the challenges of life, to revert to a simpler narrative. And so it's kind of like thinking about it that it's as if when the world is not your responsibility, you feel free to make mistakes, you know. But when the world is, you realize it's like once in a lifetime opportunity to attend to the civilization. I think there isn't much. It's like nature's clarity was to say, you know, you are the clarity, kind of. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.